The Arizona sun didn't just shine. It beat down, a merciless white hammer that pounded all the color from the land. Three riders burst through the shimmering heat, their horses lathered, their faces grim. They weren't just running from the law. They were running from a mistake, a big one. For 2 weeks they'd carried their prize. Not gold, not cattle. A little girl, barely 4 years old, snatched from her bed in the dead of night. The plan was supposed to be easy. Ransom. Gold. A clean ride into Mexico. But plans fall apart. And out here, when things go wrong, they go wrong fast. "She's slowing us down," one of the men growled, his voice like grinding rocks. The leader stared back down the valley. He didn't need a spyglass to see the dust cloud. Cavalry, or maybe militia. Riding hard. "She's our only bargaining chip," he snapped. But even he didn't believe it anymore. The youngest of them, a boy playing at being a man, shifted in his saddle. "We can't just leave her. The coyotes." The leader swung off his horse. He didn't have time for this. He lifted the child from the saddle, her small body limp with exhaustion. Her dress was torn. Her blonde hair was a mess of burrs and dirt. In her tiny hand, she clutched a single perfect wooden bird, carved with impossible detail. He set her down by the trickle of a creek, under the shade of a few stubborn cottonwoods. He pushed a tin cup into her other hand. "Water here," he grunted. "Someone will find you." The girl just stared, her blue eyes wide and silent. She didn't cry. She hadn't made a sound for days. The third outlaw, a man whose face was a roadmap of bad decisions, was already turning his horse. "Let's go," he muttered, refusing to look at the child. A whistle cut through the wind. Shouts. The dust cloud was closer now. That decided it. Three men spurred their horses, their hoofbeats a frantic drumbeat of retreat, leaving the little girl alone with a tin cup, a wooden bird, and the vast, hungry silence of the desert. She watched them go, then slowly with both hands, lifted the cup to the creek. She took a sip of cool water and whispered a single word into the wind. A name, but no one was there to hear it. As dusk began to bleed purple and orange across the sky, a figure emerged from the heat haze. She moved with the quiet grace of someone who didn't just live in this land, but was a part of it. An Apache woman. Her name was Maddie. Life had carved its lines into her face. She'd buried a husband. She'd buried a daughter. All she had left was her son, Troy, a watchful boy of 9 who was the entire center of her world. She was gathering roots by the creek when she saw her, the pale-haired child sitting perfectly still, the setting sun turning her hair to spun gold. Maddie stopped dead. Her eyes, sharp and knowing, read the story in the dirt. 3 sets of horse tracks leaving in a hurry. Boot prints. A child left behind. Not lost. Abandoned. Maddie crouched low, her movements slow, careful not to frighten the little one. She opened her palms to show they were empty. "Water," she said softly, first in Apache, then in the choppy English she'd learned from traders. The girl didn't flinch. She just stared, clutching the tin cup and the strange wooden bird. Something in Maddie's chest tightened. This wasn't a burden. This was a soul the desert would claim by morning. The Creator had placed this child in her path. To walk away now would be a sin too heavy to carry. She saw the bird then. The carving was impossibly fine, the work of a master. It was a flicker, a type of wren, its head cocked as if listening. It was not a toy an outlaw would carry. It was a treasure. Slowly, Maddie extended a hand. The girl watched her for a long, silent moment. Then, with a trust that broke Maddie's heart, she placed her small, dirty hand into the Apache woman's palm. A life passing from one world to another. That night, Maddie built a small fire. She made a thin broth and coaxed the girl to eat. When the child finally drifted to sleep, exhausted and safe for the first time in weeks, Maddie covered her with a warm buffalo robe. She sat awake for hours, the little girl's wooden bird resting in her palm. The craftsmanship was stunning, made from ironwood, polished smooth. This was a gift of love, not something found, but something given, a message. But what did it mean? She whispered a prayer to Usan, the giver of life. "Show me the path," she murmured to the stars. I cannot turn her away. But what trouble does she carry? The child stirred, a single broken word escaping her lips in a dream. It sounded like a prayer, or a plea. At dawn, Maddie strapped the child to her back with a sash. The journey home was 12 miles of brutal country, but Maddie walked with a steady purpose, the weight on her back feeling less like a burden and more like a destiny. Halfway there, the girl woke. She didn't speak, but her small hand reached up and touched Maddie's long, black braid. Maddie glanced back. Your name will come back to you, little one, she said gently. Until it does, I will call you Ada. It means a gift from the desert spring. When they finally reached the small Apache camp nestled in the cottonwoods, a boy came running. It was Troy, his dark eyes taking in the world with a seriousness beyond his 9 years. He stopped short when he saw the pale-haired child on his mother's back. Who is she? He asked, his voice a breathless whisper. Maddie lowered Ada gently to the ground. She is a gift, she said, her voice firm, leaving no room for argument. Left for us to keep. Ada swayed on her feet, her gaze locking with Troy's. Then she reached out her hand. Troy looked at his mother, a dozen questions in his eyes. Then he looked back at the strange, silent girl. He took her hand. She is your sister now, Maddie told him. You will keep her safe. Troy nodded, a solemn vow passing between mother and son. He squeezed the small hand in his. I will keep her safe, he repeated. That night inside their lodge, Ada lay sleeping between them. The fire cast flickering shadows on the hide walls. Troy couldn't sleep. He watched the stranger who was now his sister, this girl with hair like corn silk and skin that seemed to glow in the firelight. He saw the wooden bird clutched in her hand, even in sleep. He reached out, his fingers hovering over the delicate carving. It felt important, dangerous. Later that week, while Maddie was away trading, the camp's elder, a man named Gray Owl, came to their lodge. He looked at Ada with eyes that seemed to see through skin and bone. He saw the bird in her hands. His face went pale. Where did this child come from? He demanded of Troy, his voice low and urgent. Troy explained what his mother had told him. Left by the creek. Gray Owl shook his head slowly. This bird, he whispered, pointing a trembling finger. It is the mark of the carver, a man from your world, a white man. They say his spirit guides the hands of those who do him justice and brings ruin to those who shelter his enemies. Troy's blood ran cold. What does it mean? The boy asked. It means this child is not a gift, Gray Owl said, his eyes dark with old fears. She is a reckoning, and she has brought it to our door. He turned and left, leaving Troy alone with his new sister, and a secret that felt heavier than any mountain. He never told his mother what the elder had said. He just tightened his vow. He would keep her safe, no matter what it cost. The years passed like the turning of the seasons in the valley. Ada grew, her torn dress replaced by soft buckskin, her pale hair a startling contrast to the dark braids of the other children. She learned to ride, to hunt, to read the land, and always Troy was there. He was more than a brother. He was her shadow, her shield. He taught her how to track a deer, how to find water, how to be silent and invisible in the brush. When other children whispered about the pale spirit girl, Troy's glare was enough to silence them. He remembered Gray Owl's warning, and it coiled in his gut like a snake. A reckoning. Ada never questioned their bond. Troy was her family, her anchor. But sometimes in the quiet of the evening, she would touch her own fair hair, then look at Maddie's, then at Troy's. Why don't I look like you? She asked one night when she was 9. Maddie's hands stilled in her sewing. Her eyes held a deep sadness that Ada was too young to understand. You favor your father, she said simply. It was an answer that was not an answer, but it was enough for a child. Ada let it rest, but the question remained, a tiny seed planted in the back of her mind. When Ada was 15, she was a striking young woman, fierce and capable. But the difference in her skin was a wall she could never quite climb over. In the Apache camp, she was one of them. But near the white settlements, she was a curiosity, an oddity. Troy saw the way men's eyes lingered on her, and the protectiveness he felt curdled into something hotter, sharper. He told himself it was a brother's duty. He was lying. He knew she wasn't his sister. He knew she was something more. And the secret of the carver's bird, which she still kept, a treasured relic from a life she couldn't remember, burned in his memory. Then came the sickness. It took Maddie quickly, a fever that no herbs or prayers could break. Troy and Ada stayed by her side, their world shrinking to the space of that one small lodge. As the sun set on her last day, Maddie reached for their hands. Her voice was a wisp of smoke. "My children," she whispered, her eyes finding Troy's. "Stand together. Always." Her gaze sharpened, a desperate urgency burning through the fever. "Troy, the man with gray eyes. Never trust the man with gray eyes. Protect the bird. Protect her." Her breath faded, and she was gone. The silence she left behind was absolute. Ada collapsed against Troy, her sobs shaking her entire body. Troy held her tight, his own grief a stone in his chest. But Maddie's last words echoed in his mind. The man with gray eyes. A warning. A prophecy. He now had two secrets to carry. Gray owls and his mother's. And they both felt like they were pointing a gun straight at Ada's heart. After Maddie's death, the world fell away, leaving only the two of them. They weren't bound by blood, but by a promise made to a dying woman. They ran their lodge, hunted together, survived together. They were two halves of a whole. For Ada, Troy was her rock, the only certainty in a life that had begun in mystery. But as she grew into a woman, the way he looked at her sometimes made her heart stumble. A hand brushing hers, a lingering glance across the fire. She told herself it was just the closeness of two orphans clinging to each other. Troy knew better. He knew the truth of her past, the secret of the bird, and the warning from his mother. And he knew that what he felt for her was not the love of a brother. It was a fierce, consuming fire he had to keep banked, hidden. He had promised Maddie he would wait. He would let Ada choose her own path. But every day the silence grew heavier. One evening, when Ada was 24, they sat watching the sky burn over the mesas. The air was thick with the smell of sage. "Troy," she said quietly, "do you ever wonder what it would be like to live in a town, in a house with real walls?" His jaw tightened. "Do you wish for that?" "Sometimes," she admitted, "but then I think of what Mother said. We're all we have. We stand together." Her words were both a comfort and a knife twisting in his gut. He wanted to tell her everything, that she wasn't his sister, that he loved her, that her past was a dark storm gathering just over the horizon. But Maddie's warning held him back. "Not yet." The man with gray eyes. "We'll always stand together," he said, his voice rough. "That will never change." Ada smiled and leaned against him as the stars began to prick the velvet darkness. It was enough, for now. But Troy could feel it in his bones. The future, with all its secrets and its promised violence, was coming for them. It was Troy's idea to go to the fair. "They'll have traders from Tucson, Santa Fe," he said, trying to sound casual. "You should see it." What he didn't say was that he'd heard whispers. Whispers of a rich rancher from the South. A man who had lost a child 20 years ago, who never stopped searching. A man, they said, with hair like silver and eyes the color of a stormy sky. Gray eyes. The fair was a chaotic explosion of life. Traders shouted, fiddles scraped, and the air was a thick mix of roasting pork and gun oil. Ada's eyes were wide with wonder. She had never seen anything like it. Troy stayed close, a silent, watchful guardian. His presence next to the striking, pale-haired woman drew more than a few stares. He felt them like insects crawling on his skin. He was looking for one stare in particular. They stopped near a booth selling painted portraits. Stiff, formal faces staring out from another world. And then Ada felt it, a gaze so intense it was like a physical touch. She turned. He was standing just a few paces away, a tall man dressed in a worn but dignified suit. Silver at the temples, a neatly trimmed mustache, and eyes the color of cold, hard stone. Gray eyes. Troy's hand went to the knife at his belt. Maddie's warning screamed in his head. The man took a step forward, his voice a trembling whisper. "Elizabeth!" Ada blinked, confused. I'm sorry? Elizabeth, he said again, louder this time, his voice cracking with emotion. My God, you are her image, my daughter. Troy moved in a blur, stepping between them, a human wall. You mistake her, he said, his voice dangerously low. But the man's eyes, filled with a sudden, shocking grief, never left Ada's face. No, he choked out, tears welling. That face, it's your mother's. You are mine. Ada's world tilted. Elizabeth, a name from a dream, a name she herself had whispered by the creek all those years ago. How could he know that name? You're wrong, she said, her voice shaking as she backed away. My mother was Maddie. This is my brother. The man pressed a hand to his chest. I am Jonathan Hale. For 20 years I have searched for my daughter, Elizabeth Ada Hale, stolen from me by outlaws. His gaze flickered to Troy, and something hard and cold entered his eyes. Stolen by savages who prey on the weak. The accusation hung in the air, sharp and ugly. Troy, Ada whispered, grabbing his arm. Let's go. But it was too late. Jonathan Hale had found her. And Troy knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that this man was not here for a happy reunion. He was here to reclaim what he believed was his, and he would destroy anyone who stood in his way. The ride home was a silent torment. The setting sun painted the desert in brutal shades of red and orange. Ada's mind was a maelstrom. He knew my name, Troy, she finally whispered into the wind. Elizabeth. He knew a name, Troy said, his jaw so tight it ached. It doesn't make it true. But what if it is? Her voice was fragile. What if Maddie, what if she lied to me? Troy reined his horse in, turning to face her. Maddie was your mother, he said, his voice fierce. She found you, she raised you, she loved you. That is the only truth that matters. But it wasn't enough. Not anymore. A crack had appeared in the foundation of her world, and she could feel it starting to crumble. 2 days later, Troy came in from tending the horses, his face a grim mask. He's here, he said without preamble. Ada's heart hammered against her ribs. Jonathan Hale, he had followed them. Troy had told him to leave, that Ada belonged with them. But as Troy had watched him ride away, he'd seen the look in Hale's eyes. This wasn't over. A man who carries a ghost for 20 years doesn't just walk away. That night, Ada lay awake, staring at the shadows dancing on the lodge roof. Who was she? Was she Ada, the Apache girl? Or was she Elizabeth, the lost daughter? For the first time, the two identities felt like they were at war inside her. Jonathan Hale didn't come back alone. He returned with the town sheriff and 2 deputies, their horses kicking up dust as they rode into the quiet Apache camp. They stopped before the lodge, 4 men representing a world of laws and papers that had no place here. I only wish to speak, Hale called out, but his voice had an edge of authority now. He wasn't asking. He was demanding. Troy emerged from the lodge, his body language a clear threat. You've said enough. The sheriff, a heavy-set man with a weary face, stepped forward. Mr. Hale has filed a legal claim, Troy, a claim of guardianship for his missing daughter, Elizabeth. The words were like a slap. Ada appeared in the doorway behind Troy, her face pale. Jonathan's eyes fixed on her. Child, I am your father. Your mother, Elizabeth, died of a broken heart after you were taken. You belong with your blood. His gaze shifted to Troy, filled with contempt. You have kept her living in a lie. What does he mean? Ada turned to Troy, her voice pleading. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Finally, Troy spoke, his voice low and heavy with the weight of the secret he'd carried for so long. Mother found you by the creek. You were 4 years old. Outlaws left you there. He couldn't bring himself to tell her the rest. Not yet. Her world shattered. So I'm not your sister? Not by blood, Troy said, his eyes filled with a pain that mirrored her own. But in every way that matters, you are my family. You see, Jonathan pressed, stepping forward. He admits it. She is mine. He reached into his coat. I have proof. He held out a silver locket. Ada took it with trembling hands. She opened it. Inside was a tiny painted portrait of a woman with pale hair and gentle gray eyes. Her own eyes. The resemblance was undeniable. A punch to the gut. This was her mother. Her blood. Come home, Elizabeth, Jonathan urged, his voice soft, persuasive. Come home to where you belong. Ada looked from the locket to Troy's anguished face, then to Jonathan's triumphant one. Two worlds, two lives, two fathers, pulling her apart. Then she felt something else in her hand, the small wooden bird. She had carried it without thinking. She held it up. I have this, she said, her voice barely a whisper. It's all I have from before. The sheriff leaned in, his eyes widening in disbelief. My God, he breathed. The carver's bird. Jonathan Hale froze. A flicker of something unreadable, fear, crossed his face before he masked it. The carver? Ada asked. Elias Hale, the sheriff said, his voice grim. Jonathan's brother, your uncle, the finest woodcarver in the territory. He was murdered 20 years ago. Robbery, they said, but they never found the killer. That bird, that was his signature. He only ever made one for his daughter. The silence was deafening. Jonathan wasn't her father. He was her uncle. My brother, Jonathan stammered, recovering quickly. He and his wife were raising you after my Elizabeth died. That's what I meant. A slip of the tongue in my grief. Of course, Elias was your father. It was a lie. Ada could feel it. Troy could see it. The pieces didn't fit. Maddie's warning wasn't about a grieving uncle. It was about a man with gray eyes. A dangerous man. He's lying, Troy said, his voice flat and cold. He looked at Ada, a silent apology in his eyes for the pain he was about to cause her. My mother told me the truth before she died. She didn't find you abandoned. She found you hiding in the brush. And nearby were the bodies of two men, murdered. The sheriff's hand went to his gun. She was terrified, Troy continued, his voice ringing with conviction. She saw a rider leaving the scene, a man who matched his description. He pointed a shaking finger at Jonathan. She said he was the one who killed them. She hid you to protect you from him. The outlaw story was a lie to keep you safe. This is insane, Jonathan blustered. A savage's deathbed fantasy. But the sheriff was looking at Jonathan Hale with new, suspicious eyes. The unsolved murder of Elias Hale had been a shadow over the territory for 2 decades. And now a living, breathing piece of evidence was standing right in front of him. Mr. Hale, the sheriff said slowly, his voice laced with steel, I think you and I need to have a long talk. Back in town. The whispers in town turned into a roar. The story spread like wildfire. Jonathan Hale's lost niece, found living with the Apache, the daughter of the murdered carver, and now a suspect in that very murder. Jonathan was questioned for hours, but his story was smooth, polished by 20 years of practice. He was the grieving uncle, the devoted caretaker of his brother's memory and estate. He painted Maddie as a superstitious native who stole his niece from the scene of a tragic outlaw attack. The town was divided. Who do you believe? The rich, civilized rancher, or the Apache boy defending his adopted sister? The law had no proof. Jonathan was released, but the cloud of suspicion lingered. He returned to his ranch, a prisoner in his own home, his plans in ruins. But Ada knew, and Troy knew, that a man like that wouldn't simply give up. He was cornered, and a cornered animal is the most dangerous kind. They retreated to their life by the creek, but the peace was gone. The world had found them, and it wouldn't let them go. Ada was haunted by the image of the locket, the face of the mother she never knew, and the chilling possibility that the man claiming to be her family was actually her father's killer. One night she sat by the fire, the wooden bird in her hand. Why, Troy? She asked, her voice hollow. Why didn't you tell me everything? Mother made me promise, he said, his voice rough with unshed grief. She said the truth would put a target on your back. She was trying to protect you. And you. She looked at him, her eyes searching his. All these years, did you just see me as a secret to be kept? His heart cracked. He set aside the arrow he was fletching. Ada, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper, I have never seen you as less than my sister. Only more. The confession hung in the air between them, raw and terrifying and beautiful. It was too much. She couldn't process it, not with the shadow of her past looming over them. She stood up and fled the lodge, running toward the creek, her heart a wild, panicked drum against her ribs. Trouble came not as a whisper, but as a scream of fire in the night. It started with smoke on the horizon. A neighboring ranch burned to the ground. The fences cut, the cattle driven off into the hills. The riders who escaped told of men in black scarves, riding hard and shooting harder. The Coulter gang, the sheriff said, his face grim. I'd heard they were holed up in Mexico. The name sent a chill down Ada's spine. The Coulter gang. Weren't they the ones Jonathan claimed had killed her father? The ones who supposedly abandoned her? Another lie? Fear gripped the valley. Doors were barred, rifles loaded. This wasn't a robbery. It was a message. A week later, as the sun was setting, a lone rider approached their lodge. It wasn't Jonathan. It was the sheriff. Ada, he said, his face etched with worry. The Coulters hit the stagecoach outside of town. We got one of them. He's wounded bad, but he's talking. Troy stood beside Ada, his hand resting on the hilt of his knife. He says the man who hired them, the man who paid them to come back from Mexico and stir up this hell, was Jonathan Hale. The world stopped spinning. Why? Ada whispered. The talk in town was turning against him, the sheriff explained. My investigation was getting close. Hale needed a distraction, a crisis. He hired the Coulters to create chaos, drive people off their land. He planned to ride in at the end, the hero who restored order, buying up the cheap land and clearing his name in the process. It was monstrous, a plan born of pure greed and desperation. But it gets worse, the sheriff said, his eyes finding Ada's. The outlaw confessed to something else. He was just a kid back then, but he rode with the same gang. He says 20 years ago, Jonathan Hale didn't hire them to kidnap his niece. He hired them to kill his brother, Elias. The air went out of Ada's lungs. It was supposed to look like a robbery, the sheriff continued, his voice a low growl. But you saw it, Ada. You were there, a 4-year-old witness. They were supposed to get rid of you too. But the youngest one, the one who's dying in my jail right now, he couldn't do it. He left you by the creek instead. Twist after twist, lie after lie. Her entire life was a story written by a murderer. Where is Hale now? Troy asked, his voice like ice. Holed up at his ranch. He knows we're coming, and the rest of the Coulter gang is with him. He promised them a fortune and a safe ride to Mexico. They're his private army now. The sheriff looked from Troy to Ada. I have a posse, but he's fortified the ranch house. It's going to be a bloodbath. I came here to warn you, to tell you to stay away. This is his endgame. But Troy and Ada just looked at each other. This wasn't just the sheriff's fight. This wasn't about the law. This was about justice. For Maddie, for Elias, for the little girl left by the creek. We're not staying away, Troy said. Ada nodded, her eyes blazing with a cold fire. This ends tonight. They rode with the posse under the cold light of a full moon. The Hale Ranch was a fortress of shadows, with lights burning in every window. They were expected. The plan was simple. The posse would attack from the front, a direct assault to draw their fire. Troy, using the skills Maddie had taught him, would slip around the back, silent as a ghost, and find a way inside. Ada, a crack shot with a rifle, would take up a position on the ridge overlooking the ranch, providing cover fire. The first volley of shots exploded the night's silence. Gunfire erupted from the ranch house, bright flashes in the darkness. The fight was on. Ada's heart pounded as she sighted down her rifle barrel. This was insane, but as she saw Troy melt into the shadows near the back of the house, a calm resolve settled over her. She took a breath, squeezed the trigger, and a man on the porch roof crumpled. One down. Inside, Troy moved through the house like a wraith. He took out 2 guards without a sound, their surprise a fleeting expression in the dim light. He could hear Jonathan Hale shouting orders from the main study, his voice tight with panic. But Hale had an ace up his sleeve. The leader of the Coulter gang, a brutal man named Slade, was not in the study. He was waiting. As Troy kicked open the study door, Slade emerged from an adjoining room, a pistol in each hand. Jonathan was cowering behind his desk. The famous Apache boy, Slade sneered. Hale said you'd be coming. It was a trap. Outside, the gunfire intensified. Ada saw the posse pinned down. She needed to do something. She scanned the windows, looking for a target, for any sign of Troy. Then she saw it. A flicker of movement in the upstairs master bedroom. Not a gunman. A woman. A maid, terrified, hiding by the window. The woman saw Ada, saw the rifle. Her eyes were wide with fear, but then she did something incredible. She pointed, downstairs, toward the study. Then she held up two fingers and made a shape like a snake with her hand. Two snakes. Slade in Jonathan. A new wave of outlaws poured out of the barn, trying to flank the posse. Ada had to make a choice. Help the posse or trust the maid's signal and try the impossible. She chose Troy. She took a deep breath, aimed her rifle not at a man, but at the massive crystal chandelier she could just make out through the study's large bay window. It was a 1 in a million shot. She fired. The bullet sang through the night, shattered the window pane, and struck the brass chain holding the chandelier. With a groan of tortured metal, the massive fixture crashed down, landing directly between Troy and Slade, showering the room in a cascade of glass and splintered wood. The diversion was all Troy needed. He launched himself over the wreckage, tackling Slade before the outlaw could get a clear shot. They crashed to the floor, a tangle of limbs and fury. Jonathan Hale saw his chance. With Troy distracted, he grabbed a pistol from his desk, his eyes wild with hate. He aimed it squarely at Troy's back. He never fired the shot. A rifle cracked from the ridge. The bullet smashed through the already broken window and struck Jonathan in the shoulder, spinning him around. He screamed and dropped the gun. Ada. She had made the impossible shot. Twice. Troy slammed Slade's head against the floorboards, knocking him unconscious. He rose, breathing heavily, and turned to face the man who had destroyed Ada's family. Jonathan was on the floor, clutching his bleeding shoulder, his face a mask of disbelief and pain. You? He gasped, looking past Troy, toward the window, toward the ridge. She shot me. My own flesh and blood. She's not your blood, Troy said, his voice deadly calm as he picked up Jonathan's fallen pistol. She's the justice you earned. The fight was over. The rest of the Coulter gang, seeing their leader captured and their employer wounded, surrendered to the posse. They brought Jonathan Hale out in cuffs, his fine suit stained with blood, his face crumpled in defeat. As they led him past Ada, who had come down from the ridge, their eyes met. There was no flicker of remorse in his gray eyes, only cold, bitter hatred. You could have had everything, Elizabeth, he spat. A name, wealth. This was all for you. My name is Ada, she said, her voice clear and strong, and I already have everything I need. She looked over at Troy, who was standing by her side, his hand finding hers. The sheriff clapped a hand on Jonathan's uninjured shoulder. Let's go, Hale. You've got a 20-year-old debt to pay. As the posse rode away, taking the darkness with them, a quiet dawn began to break over the valley. The air smelled of gunpowder and sage. Ada and Troy stood together, watching the sky turn from bruised purple to a soft, promising pink. The ghosts of the past had been faced. The lies had been burned away in the fire of the fight. He was right about one thing, Ada said softly. Troy looked at her, his expression questioning. Elizabeth, she said, testing the name on her tongue. My mother's name. I think I'll keep it. Elizabeth Ada. One for the mother who gave me life, one for the mother who saved it. She turned to him, her eyes shining in the new light, wet with tears she no longer had to hide. You said you saw me as more than a sister. Troy's heart stopped. He could only nod, unable to speak. Good, she whispered, her hand tightening in his. Because I have never, ever thought of you as my brother. She rose on her toes and kissed him, a kiss that sealed a promise made by a dying woman and forged in the heart of the desert. It wasn't the end of their story. It was the beginning, their beginning, forged not by blood, but by choice, by love, by the justice they had fought for, side by side. In the years that followed, the story of the carver's daughter became a local legend. Ada and Troy built a life on a small piece of land by that same creek, not far from where Maddie had first found her. They built a house with their own hands, with walls strong enough to keep out the wind, and a hearth big enough to warm a growing family. Jonathan Hale died in prison, a bitter, broken man. The fortune he'd killed for was eventually passed to its rightful heir, Ada. She used the money not for fancy dresses or a grand estate, but to buy back the land the small Apache camp had been pushed from, ensuring they would have a home for generations to come. She was no longer a girl caught between two worlds. She was the bridge between them. She was Elizabeth Ada, wife of Troy, mother to a son with his father's dark eyes and a daughter with hair like corn silk. She carried two histories inside her, two legacies of love, and wove them into a future that was entirely her own. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, she would take out the small wooden bird. She'd run her thumb over its smooth, worn surface and think of the long, bloody road that had led her home. The girl abandoned by outlaws, found by a warrior, hunted by a monster, and saved by a love that was truer than blood. In the wild heart of the West, her life was proof that even in the harshest desert, the most beautiful things can grow. Thank you for staying with me through this incredible journey. If a story about finding family, fighting for justice, and a love that crosses all boundaries is something you enjoyed, please show your support by hitting that like button. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next story we uncover together.